The slap echoed through the dining room like a gunshot, silencing every conversation at our Thanksgiving table. 23 people froze mid-bite, forks suspended in air. As my daughter's face turned away from the impact, I felt my blood turn to ice, then fire. But I didn't move. Not yet, because this was the moment I'd been waiting for, the moment he finally made his fatal mistake in front of witnesses. My hand found the phone in my pocket, fingers steady despite the rage coursing through me. Tonight, my son-in-law's reign of terror would end. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and at 68 years old, I've learned that the most dangerous predators often wear the friendliest masks. As I watch my son-in-law Michael straighten his tie and smooth back his perfectly styled hair after striking my daughter, I saw him for exactly what he was, a monster who'd mistaken my silence for weakness. The dining room remained frozen in that terrible moment. My daughter, Sarah, my only child, the light of my life, sat with her hand pressed to her reddening cheek. Her eyes, those beautiful hazel eyes that used to sparkle when she taught her third graders, were vacant, resigned. She'd been expecting this. We all had, in our own ways. Sarah was being disrespectful, Michael announced to the room, his voice carrying that particular tone of manufactured authority I'd grown to despise. Sometimes a man needs to maintain order in his household. His mother, Patricia, nodded approvingly from across the table, her lips pursed in that perpetual expression of superiority. "Children need discipline," she murmured, as if my 39-year-old daughter were some unruly toddler. Michael's sister Rebecca smirked into her wine glass, clearly enjoying the show, but they'd miscalculated. They'd all miscalculated. I set down my fork with deliberate precision, the small clink against fine china the only sound in the room. "Michael," I said, my voice steady as granite, "you've just made the last mistake of your marriage." He laughed, actually laughed, and I cataloged that too, adding it to my mental file alongside every sneer, every cutting remark, every suspicious bruise my daughter had tried to hide over the past 3 years. "Oh, Margaret," he said, using that condescending tone reserved for elderly women he considered beneath him. "This is between Sarah and me. Perhaps you should mind your own business." Mind my own business? As if my daughter's safety wasn't my business. As if 39 years of loving her, raising her, watching her bloom into a talented teacher full of joy and compassion meant nothing the moment she said, "I do," to this polished sociopath. I'd started noticing the changes 2 years ago. The way Sarah's laughter had gradually faded, replaced by nervous glances toward Michael before she spoke. How she'd stopped wearing her favorite bright colors, transitioning to the muted grays and blacks he preferred, the excuses for missed lunches, the way she'd flinch when her phone buzzed with his messages. Then came the bruises. First, a mark on her upper arm she blamed on bumping into a door frame, a scratch on her neck from playing with the neighbor's cat, though they had no pets. Each lie delivered with downcast eyes and trembling hands, each one carving another piece from my heart. I'd tried talking to her, of course, gathered pamphlets about domestic violence, suggested counseling, offered her a place to stay, but Michael had done his work well. He'd isolated her systematically, turning her against her friends one by one, making her quit the teaching job she loved, convincing her that she was lucky to have him, that no one else would want a woman approaching 40 who'd let herself go. The preparation for tonight had taken 6 weeks of careful planning, 6 weeks of documenting, recording, building an airtight case that would stand up in any court, because I had known since I'd spent 30 years working in federal law enforcement, that when you strike at a king, you'd better not miss. "You're right, Michael," I said, allowing a small smile to curve my lips. "This is family business, and that's exactly why I'm about to handle it." I pulled out my phone, noting with satisfaction how his expression shifted from smug superiority to uncertain wariness. Good. Let him wonder. Let him feel, for just a moment, what Sarah had been feeling for years, that sick sensation of not knowing what was coming next, of being at someone else's mercy. "What are you doing?" Patricia demanded, half rising from her chair. "This is Thanksgiving dinner. Put that away." "Oh, I'm just sending a quick message," I replied, my fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "To a friend who's been waiting to hear from me. He should be here in about 15 minutes. "What friend?" Michael's voice had lost its commanding tone, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. I recognized it, the voice he used when he felt his control slipping. "Just someone I used to work with," I said casually, "back when I was dealing with men like you professionally." The room's atmosphere shifted palpably. Sarah looked up at me, confusion and something else. Was it hope? Flickering in her eyes. Michael's jaw clenched, his hands forming fists on the white tablecloth. "I think you should leave," he said, standing slowly, using his full height to try to intimidate me. "This is my house, and—" "Actually," I interrupted, still sitting calmly, still smiling that dangerous smile I'd perfected during 3 decades of facing down criminals who thought gray hair and a grandmother's appearance meant weakness. "That's where you're wrong. But don't worry. Michael, you'll understand everything soon enough. After all, you've given me exactly what I needed tonight. Assault and battery in front of 22 witnesses. Thank you for that. It's going to make everything so much easier." Before I retired from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I'd spent 30 years specializing in organized crime and domestic terrorism. I'd learned to read people like books, to spot the predators hiding behind respectable facades. Michael had fooled my daughter with his MBA from Wharton, his 6-figure salary at the investment firm, his charity golf tournaments, but he'd never fooled me. Sarah had been my miracle baby, born when I was 29 after 3 miscarriages and years of trying. My husband David had died when she was 12, leaving just the 2 of us against the world. I'd raised her to be strong, independent, compassionate. She'd become an elementary school teacher not for the money, God knows teachers deserve better, but because she genuinely loved children, loved watching their faces light up when they finally understood a difficult concept. Then Michael Hartley entered our lives 5 years ago at a charity fundraiser. Handsome, charming, attentive, he pursued Sarah with the dedication of a hunter stalking prey. I'd had reservations from the start. Something about his eyes, the way they'd go flat when he thought no one was watching, the way he'd touch Sarah just a bit too possessively, guide her movements just a bit too firmly. But Sarah had been 34, anxious about her biological clock, tired of the dating scene. When Michael proposed after just 8 months with a 3-carat diamond and promises of a beautiful future, she'd said yes before I could voice my concerns. The warning signs started small. He'd make little jokes about her appearance, always followed by, "Just kidding, honey." He'd question her spending, despite making 4 times her salary. He'd show up at her school unexpectedly, claiming he just wanted to surprise her with lunch, but I saw how he'd scan her male colleagues with suspicious eyes. Then came the isolation. First, her best friend Janet was too flirty and a bad influence. Then her book club was a waste of time when you could be home with me. The teaching job went next. Why did she need to work when he could provide for her? Each concession chipped away at the vibrant woman I'd raised, leaving someone I barely recognized. The first time I saw a bruise, it was on her wrist, partially hidden by a bracelet. "I grabbed a hot pan wrong," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. The second time, finger marks on her upper arm. "You know how clumsy I am, Mom." The third time, a fading yellow-green mark on her ribcage I glimpsed when her shirt rode up as she reached for something. She'd pulled it down quickly, but not quickly enough. That's when I'd started planning. My first move was reconnaissance, during Sunday dinners at their house. I'd arrive early to help with cooking and plant tiny recording devices, state-of-the-art equipment a former colleague had procured for me, disguised as decorative items. They were virtually undetectable. A new picture frame here, a pretty paperweight there, a replacement smoke detector that did far more than detect smoke. For 6 weeks, I'd collected evidence, audio of Michael screaming at Sarah for forgetting to pick up his dry cleaning, video of him shoving her into a wall when she suggested visiting me for my birthday, records of him monitoring her calls, controlling her finances, threatening to make her sorry if she ever tried to leave. But I'd needed more than just documentation. I'd needed a plan that would not only remove him from her life, but ensure he could never worm his way back in. That's where my friend Judge Harrison came in. We'd worked together on numerous cases over the years, and he understood the urgency of domestic violence situations. "Margaret," he'd said when I'd shown him the evidence, "this is enough for a restraining order, but you know as well as I do that pieces of paper don't stop men like this." "I know," I'd replied. "That's why I need him to assault her in front of witnesses, prominent witnesses, his own family. Make it impossible for him to deny or minimize." Harrison had been skeptical. "That's dangerous. What if he seriously hurts her?" "He's escalating anyway," I'd pointed out. "The violence is getting worse. Last week's recording caught him choking her for 10 seconds before letting go. Next time might be longer." We'd prepared everything in advance, restraining order papers ready to file, a safe house arranged, a forensic accountant to untangle the financial abuse, even a job offer for Sarah at a private school 2 states away, courtesy of another old friend who ran an educational nonprofit. All I'd needed was the right moment, and I'd suspected Thanksgiving would provide it. Michael always performed for his family, showing off his control over Sarah like she was a trained pet. Add alcohol, the stress of hosting, and his mother's passive-aggressive needling, and I'd calculated an 80% chance he'd lose control. I'd actually estimated it would happen after dinner, during the political arguments that always erupted over dessert. But Sarah, my brave girl, had finally found a spark of her old self and contradicted him about something trivial, whether the turkey was too dry, and he'd snapped earlier than expected. Now, as I watched him standing there, fists clenched, rage building behind those cold eyes, I felt a familiar calm descend. This was my wheelhouse. This was what I'd trained for, lived for, during all those years of taking down men who thought their power made them untouchable. "You manipulative bitch," he snarled, mask fully off now. "You've been planning this." "Language. Michael," I said mildly. "There are ladies present, though I suppose a man who strikes women wouldn't understand such distinctions." The evidence collection had been meticulous work, the kind that required patience and precision, skills I'd honed during decades of building cases against criminals who believed themselves invincible. The first device I'd planted was in their living room, tucked inside a decorative wooden box I'd given Sarah for her birthday. "For your jewelry," I'd said, knowing Michael would never touch anything he considered feminine frippery. The audio quality had been crystal clear. I'd captured Michael's raging tirades about imagined slights, his threats delivered in that eerily calm voice that made them even more terrifying. "You know what happens when you embarrass me? Sarah, do you want to test me again?" The sound of breaking glass, Sarah's muffled sobs. The kitchen device, hidden in a new spice rack, had recorded the worst of it. I'd listened with clenched fists as Michael had systematically destroyed Sarah's self-worth while she tried to cook dinner. "No wonder you can't get pregnant. What man would want to breed with something as pathetic as you?" The cruel words were followed by the sound of flesh hitting flesh, a cry of pain, then his voice again. "Stop being dramatic. I barely touched you." But it was the bedroom footage that had nearly broken my resolve to wait. The camera, concealed in an antique clock I'd insisted they needed for their dresser, had captured Michael's most vicious assaults, choking her until she gasped for air, twisting her arm behind her back until she begged, always careful to leave marks where clothing would hide them, always followed by twisted declarations of love. I'd made copies of everything, storing them in multiple secure locations, one set in my bank's safety deposit box, another with Harrison, a third uploaded to a secure cloud server managed by a cybersecurity expert who owed me a favor from my FBI days. Michael might be able to destroy one copy, but he'd never get them all. The turning point had come 3 weeks ago. I'd arrived for lunch unannounced, something I'd started doing regularly, much to Michael's irritation. Sarah had answered the door with a scarf around her neck despite the 70-degree weather. When she'd reached up to hug me, the scarf had shifted, revealing deep purple bruising in the shape of fingers. "Sweetheart," I'd said quietly, "let me see." "It's nothing, Mom, I just—" "Please." She'd stood there in the doorway, tears streaming down her face as I gently unwound the scarf. The bruises were worse than I'd imagined, dark and mottled, clearly from multiple incidents. But worse than the physical evidence was the defeat in her eyes, the complete absence of the fierce spirit that had once defined her. That's when I'd heard Michael's voice from inside. "Who is it, Sarah? You know you're supposed to ask before answering the door." The casual control in his tone, the way he spoke to her like she was a disobedient child, had ignited something primal in me, but I'd force myself to remain calm, to play the role of the harmless elderly mother. "It's just me. Michael," I'd called out cheerfully, "thought I'd drop by with some cookies." He'd appeared behind Sarah, his hand possessively gripping her shoulder. I'd watched her flinch at the contact, seen how his fingers pressed just a bit too hard into her flesh. "Margaret, what a surprise." His smile never reached his eyes. "Though in the future it would be nice if you could call first. Sarah and I value our privacy." "Of course," I'd agreed, noting how Sarah seemed to shrink further with each word. "I just wanted to remind you both about Thanksgiving. I do hope you'll come." "We'll be hosting this year," Michael had announced, though this was clearly news to Sarah. "My family will expect it." Perfect. I'd thought, a house full of witnesses, including his enabling mother and sister who'd never be able to claim they hadn't seen what kind of man he really was. I'd spent the next 3 weeks finalizing every detail. Harrison had prepared not just a standard restraining order, but an emergency protective order that would go into effect immediately. He'd also connected me with Detective Linda Rodriguez, who specialized in domestic violence cases and had agreed to be on standby. The forensic accountant had uncovered even more than I'd expected. Michael had been systematically draining Sarah's accounts, moving her inheritance from David into investments solely in his name. He'd taken out credit cards in her name, racking up debt while keeping her financially dependent. Every transaction had been documented, ready for both criminal and civil proceedings. I'd also reached out to Dr. Patricia Summers, a renowned psychologist who specialized in helping abuse survivors. She'd agreed to be available immediately, understanding that Sarah would need support to navigate the aftermath of what was about to unfold. The morning of Thanksgiving, I'd done something I hadn't done in years. I'd prayed, not for forgiveness for what I was about to do, but for the strength to see it through, for Sarah to survive just a little longer, for Michael to be exactly who I knew him to be when it mattered most. I'd arrived at their house at 2 p.m, arms full of side dishes and my special chocolate pie that Sarah had loved since childhood. Michael had greeted me at the door with his usual false charm, but I'd seen the irritation flash in his eyes when I'd hugged Sarah and whispered, "I love you, sweetheart. Remember that." As the guests had arrived, Michael's mother, Patricia, with her permanent expression of disapproval, his sister, Rebecca, with her surgeon husband, various cousins and business associates, I'd carefully cataloged each one. 22 witnesses in total, including 3 who worked in the legal profession and would find it hard to deny what they'd seen. I'd watched Michael perform his role as the perfect host, noting how his gestures became more expansive with each drink, how his voice grew louder, how his touches on Sarah's arm became less gentle and more controlling. The mask was slipping already, helped along by his mother's constant criticism of Sarah's cooking, appearance, and failure to produce grandchildren. By the time we'd sat down to dinner, the tension was palpable. Sarah had barely spoken, moving like an automaton as she served the meal she'd spent days preparing. When Michael had complained about the turkey being dry, it wasn't. I'd seen something flicker in her eyes, a tiny spark of the woman she used to be. "Actually," she'd said quietly, "I think it's perfectly moist." Such a small rebellion, such a tiny assertion of her own opinion, and Michael's response had been instant and vicious, his hand moving faster than thought, the crack of palm against cheek echoing through the room like a gunshot. And now, finally, it was time. The strategy meeting with Judge Harrison had taken place in his study 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. The room smelled of leather and old books, a comforting backdrop for planning something that would require surgical precision. "The emergency protective order is ready," Harrison had said, sliding documents across his mahogany desk. "The moment he lays a hand on her in front of witnesses, we can have him removed from the premises immediately. But Margaret, you understand the risks? Men like Michael are most dangerous when they feel cornered." "I've dealt with cornered animals before," I'd replied, reviewing the paperwork. "The key is to remove their options before they realize what's happening." Harrison had introduced me to Detective Rodriguez via secure video call. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've reviewed the evidence you've collected," she'd said. "It's comprehensive, but I need you to understand, even with all this, if your daughter doesn't cooperate, if she protects him—" "She will cooperate," I'd said firmly. "Once she sees he can't hurt her anymore, once she feels safe, the Sarah I raised will come back." We'd choreographed every detail. Rodriguez would be having dinner with her family just 10 minutes away, ready to respond immediately. 2 patrol officers would be coincidentally in the neighborhood. The papers would be served the moment Michael became violent, and Harrison had arranged for an emergency hearing the next morning, even though it was a holiday weekend. "What about his retaliation?" Rodriguez had asked. "Men like this don't just accept defeat." "I have contingencies," I'd assured her. 30 years in federal law enforcement teaches you to always have a backup plan. Those contingencies had included hiring a private security firm to watch Sarah's house starting the day after Thanksgiving. I'd also reached out to Michael's employer through back channels. It turned out they'd had concerns about his temperament for months. Complaints from female colleagues about inappropriate behavior, questions about expense account irregularities. They were looking for a reason to act. The financial preparation had been equally thorough. The forensic accountant, David Blackwood, had uncovered a pattern of embezzlement that went beyond just stealing from Sarah. Michael had been skimming from client accounts at his firm, small amounts he thought would go unnoticed. "This is enough for federal charges," Blackwood had told me. "Wire fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion. He's looking at serious prison time if prosecutors decide to pursue it." "Good," I'd said. "Men like Michael understand only 2 things, power and consequences. I intend to teach him about both." I'd also prepared for the emotional warfare that would follow Doctor. Summers had helped me create a support plan for Sarah, including immediate therapy, a safe house where she could stay temporarily, and connections to a survivor support group. "The first 72 hours after leaving are crucial. Doctor," Summers had explained. "That's when victims are most likely to return to their abusers. She'll need constant support. Margaret, are you prepared for that?" "I've been preparing for this for 3 years," I'd told her. The morning of Thanksgiving, I'd made one final preparation. I'd visited my safety deposit box and removed a small item, David's police badge, which I'd kept after his death. He'd been a detective, killed in the line of duty when Sarah was 12. I'd tucked it into my purse, a talisman of strength and a reminder that sometimes protecting the innocent requires taking risks. I'd also placed a call to Rebecca Morrison, a family law attorney who'd handled several high-profile divorce cases involving domestic violence. She'd agreed to meet with Sarah the Monday after Thanksgiving, with papers ready to file immediately. "We'll request full custody of any future children, sole possession of the marital home, and significant alimony given the financial abuse." Morrison had outlined, "With your evidence, he won't have a leg to stand on." The plan had multiple layers, each designed to strip away Michael's power piece by piece. His control over Sarah would end with the protective order. His reputation would crumble when the assault became public record. His financial manipulation would be exposed in divorce court, and if he tried to retaliate, the embezzlement evidence would ensure his destruction. Harrison had expressed one final concern during our last meeting. Margaret, you're essentially destroying this man's entire life. Are you prepared for that level of vengeance? I'd thought of Sarah's bruises, her dead eyes. The vibrant teacher turned into a shadow of herself. He destroyed my daughter's life methodically and with malice. I'm simply returning the favor with interest. Now, sitting at the Thanksgiving table with the plan in motion, I felt the calm certainty that comes from thorough preparation. My phone buzzed. A text from Rodriguez confirming she was in position. Another from Harrison saying the judge on call was ready to sign the emergency order. A third from Blackwood with one word: ready. I looked around the table at Michael's family, these people who'd enabled his behavior through silence and approval. Patricia, who'd raised a son to believe women were possessions. Rebecca, who'd watched Sarah's light dim and said nothing. The cousins who'd laughed at Michael's jokes about keeping Sarah in line. They were all about to learn what happened when you crossed a federal agent who'd spent 30 years taking down predators. They were about to discover that the harmless-looking grandmother at their table had once been known as Iron Maggie in the Bureau, famous for never losing a case she'd built. Michael was still standing, his face flushed with anger and alcohol, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. He'd made the fatal error so many criminals make, underestimating an opponent based on age and gender. 15 minutes, I said, checking my watch. That's how long you have left as a free man. Michael, I suggest you savor them. His expression shifted from anger to uncertainty. Good. Let him wonder. Let him feel the walls closing in without understanding how or why. Let him experience, for just these few moments, the helpless terror he'd inflicted on my daughter for years. Because in 15 minutes, Detective Rodriguez would walk through that door, and Michael Hartley would learn what it meant to face consequences. Real consequences, delivered by someone who'd spent a lifetime ensuring that predators paid for their crimes. The clock on the wall ticked steadily toward 8:45 p.m., and I smiled. The dining room hummed with the kind of tension that precedes a thunderstorm. Michael had returned to his seat, but his eyes kept darting to me, trying to decipher my words. The other guests shifted uncomfortably, forks clicking against china in a nervous symphony. More wine? Anyone? Patricia's voice cut through the silence, artificially bright. She was already reaching for the bottle, her movements sharp and agitated. Really, Margaret, I don't know what's gotten into you tonight. These dramatics at a family dinner. Mother's right, Rebecca chimed in, her surgeon husband nodding beside her. This is hardly the time or place for whatever this is. She shot a disapproving look at Sarah, as if my daughter were somehow responsible for being struck in the face. I watched Sarah carefully. She hadn't moved since the slap, her hand still pressed to her cheek, but something had changed in her posture. The impact had shocked her out of her submissive haze, and I could see her beginning to process what had just happened, what was about to happen. Sarah, darling, Michael said, his voice shifting to that honeyed tone he used after violence. I'm sorry. You know how you provoke me sometimes, but that's no excuse. Come here, sweetheart. It was textbook abuse behavior, violence followed by manipulation disguised as apology. I'd seen it 1,000 times in my career, but watching it directed at my daughter made my stomach churn with rage. Sarah looked at him, then at me, confusion clouding her features. Mom? Stay where you are, sweetheart, I said calmly. You don't have to go to him. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Michael's face darkened. Don't interfere with my wife. Margaret, Sarah, I said come here, now. The command in his voice was absolute, the tone of a man who'd grown accustomed to instant obedience. Around the table, his family members watched with varying degrees of discomfort and complicity. Patricia nodded approvingly at her son's authority. Rebecca examined her manicure. The cousins exchanged glances, but said nothing. She's not a dog, Michael, I observed, though I understand the confusion, given how you've trained her to respond to commands. How dare you? Patricia began, but I cut her off. I dare because I've watched your son systematically destroy my daughter for 3 years while you've applauded his control. I pulled out my phone again, checking the time. 8:37 But please, Patricia, tell me more about how a real man maintains order in his household. I'm fascinated by your expertise in raising an abuser. Abuser? Patricia's voice rose to a shriek. My son is a successful investment banker. He provides Sarah with everything, this beautiful home, designer clothes, a life most women would kill for. Except freedom, I said. Except safety. Except the ability to see her friends, work at the job she loved, or make a single decision without his permission. Michael stood again, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. That's enough. Get out of my house. Now. Your house? I laughed, the sound sharp in the tense air. You mean the house purchased with Sarah's inheritance? The one you've mortgaged without her knowledge to cover your gambling debts? His face went white. You're lying. Atlantic City 3 months ago. $47,000 at the blackjack tables. Las Vegas, 6 months before that. $63,000. Should I continue? I have receipts. The room erupted. Patricia gasped. Rebecca's husband muttered something about financial impropriety. Michael's cousin James, who worked at a competing firm, leaned forward with obvious interest. But Michael's reaction was the most telling. The mask didn't just slip. It shattered completely. His handsome face contorted with rage, veins bulging in his neck, fists clenched so tight his knuckles went white. You fucking bitch, he snarled, taking a step toward me. You've been spying on me? You think you can come into my house and— Michael! Sarah's voice cracked like a whip, surprising everyone, including herself. Don't you dare threaten my mother. It was the first time she'd stood up to him in months, maybe years. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Michael spun toward her, his body coiled with violence. What did you say to me? Sarah flinched but didn't back down. Something in my presence, in the exposure of his secrets, had given her a fragment of courage. I said, don't threaten my mother. I won't let you. You won't let me. He laughed, the sound ugly and dangerous. You won't let me. Have you forgotten who you're talking to? Have you forgotten what happens when you disrespect me? He moved toward her, and I saw several of the male guests tense as if to intervene, but they didn't need to. I'd already shifted position, placing myself partially between them. Touch her again, Michael, and you'll regret it for the rest of your life, I said quietly, which, given what's about to happen, will be spent largely behind bars. You're threatening me. You. His attention swung back to me, which was exactly what I'd intended. What are you going to do, old woman? Hit me with your purse. I smiled. No, Michael, I'm going to destroy you. Legally, financially, and socially. I'm going to take apart your life piece by piece, the same way you've taken apart my daughter's. The difference is, I'll do it all within the law. Mom, Sarah whispered, what's happening? Justice, sweetheart, long overdue justice. Michael's mother stood, her face flushed with wine and indignation. This is ridiculous. Michael is a good man, a provider. If Sarah would just learn to— To what, Patricia? I turned on her. To accept being choked? To stop crying when he breaks her ribs? To be grateful when he allows her 5 minutes to speak to her own mother? You're being dramatic, Rebecca interjected. Michael would never— Never what? I pulled out my phone one more time. Never do this? I hit play on a saved audio file. Michael's voice filled the room, recorded just 2 weeks ago. You worthless cunt. I should have left you where I found you. No one else would want used goods like you. You're lucky I even look at you. The sound of a slap. Sarah's sob. Then Michael again. Shut up, or I'll give you something to really cry about. I stopped the recording. The room was tomb silent. Patricia had gone pale. Rebecca stared at her brother as if seeing him for the first time. The cousins and their spouses sat frozen, processing what they'd just heard. That's taken out of context, Michael stammered. That's not. You can't just record someone in their own home. Actually, I can, I said pleasantly. You see, Sarah is on the deed to this house. She gave me permission to install security cameras for her safety. Everything I've recorded is perfectly legal and admissible in court. 8:42 p.m., 3 more minutes. Michael's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and he knew it. I could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Deny, deflect, attack. But every avenue was closing. His family had heard the recording. They'd seen him strike Sarah. The witnesses he'd counted on for support were now potential testimony against him. "You planned this," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You set me up." "No, Michael. You set yourself up every time you laid hands on my daughter. I just made sure there would be consequences." The doorbell rang. 8:45 p.m., right on schedule? "I'll get it," I said, rising smoothly from my chair. Michael moved to block my path, but James and another cousin stood as well, creating an obstacle he couldn't ignore without causing a scene. I opened the door to find Detective Rodriguez exactly as I'd expected. Professional, composed, with 2 uniformed officers flanking her. She held up her badge with practiced ease. "Detective Linda Rodriguez, Domestic Violence Unit, we received a report of an assault occurring at this address." "Right on time, detectives," I said, stepping aside. "The victim is in the dining room along with 22 witnesses to the assault." Michael appeared in the foyer, his face cycling through emotions, rage, disbelief, calculation. "Officers, there's been a misunderstanding. This is a family matter." "Sir, I need you to step back," Rodriguez said firmly. Her hand rested casually on her service weapon, a subtle reminder of authority. "Ma'am, can you show me to the victim?" I led them into the dining room, where Sarah sat surrounded by Michael's family. The red mark on her face had darkened into a clear handprint, damning evidence that would photograph well for the case file. "Sarah Hartley?" Rodriguez approached slowly, her voice gentle but professional. "I'm Detective Rodriguez. I understand you were assaulted this evening. Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" Sarah looked at me, then at Michael, who stood in the doorway vibrating with barely contained fury. I don't... "It's okay, sweetheart," I said. "Tell her the truth, all of it." Rodriguez knelt beside Sarah's chair, maintaining eye contact. "Mrs. Hartley, I see the mark on your face. Did your husband strike you this evening?" The room held its breath. This was the moment. Sarah could deny it, protect him as she had so many times before, or she could finally break free. "Yes," she whispered, then stronger. "Yes, he slapped me, in front of everyone." "Did anyone here witness this assault?" Rodriguez asked the room at large. For a moment, no one spoke. Then James cleared his throat. "I saw it. He hit her because she disagreed about the turkey." "I saw it too," said one of the younger cousins, her voice shaky but determined. It was horrible." One by one, voices confirmed what had happened. Even Rebecca, after a long look at her brother's twisted face, nodded reluctantly. Only Patricia remained silent, her world reshaping itself around the revelation that her golden son was exactly what I'd said he was. Rodriguez stood. "Mr. Hartley, I'm placing you under arrest for domestic assault. You have the right to remain silent." "This is bullshit," Michael exploded. "It was just a slap. She provoked me. You can't arrest me for disciplining my own wife." "Actually, we can," Rodriguez said calmly. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Michael backed away. No, this is a setup. That bitch." He pointed at me. "She planned this whole thing. She's been recording me illegally, spreading lies." The recordings were legal," I interjected, "as is the financial documentation of your embezzlement, both from Sarah and from your firm. Oh, and did I mention your senior partner, William Ashford, is a personal friend. He's very interested in the discrepancies I've found in your client accounts." Michael's face went from red to white. "You vindictive cunt! You've ruined everything." "Language, Mr. Hartley," Rodriguez warned, "and I'd advise you to comply before we add resisting arrest to your charges." "Mom?" Sarah stood slowly, as if testing her ability to move without permission. "You did all this for me?" "I burned the world down for you, sweetheart," I said simply. but all I had to do was expose the truth. Michael made his fatal error then. Cornered, humiliated, his carefully constructed life in ruins. He lunged, not at the officers, but at Sarah. "This is your fault, you stupid—" He never finished the sentence. Rodriguez moved with the fluid grace of someone who'd taken down men twice her size. Within seconds, Michael was face down on his own dining room floor, hands cuffed behind his back, Rodriguez's knee planted firmly between his shoulder blades. "Now we add attempted assault on a victim and attempting to intimidate a witness," she said conversationally. "Your bail just got a lot higher, Mr. Hartley." The uniforms hauled Michael to his feet. His perfect hair was mussed, his designer shirt untucked and stained from the floor. The master of the house reduced to a common criminal in front of the audience he'd most wanted to impress. "Patricia," he called to his mother desperately, "call Lawrence. Tell him to meet me at the station. Tell him." "Your attorney will have his hands full," I said. "The FBI will be picking up your case Monday morning. Wire fraud across state lines is federal, after all." "Oh, and that trip to Vegas. You used client funds. That's a federal crime, too." Rodriguez handed me a card. "We'll need you and Sarah to come to the station tomorrow to give formal statements. Tonight, I'd recommend Sarah stay somewhere safe." "Already arranged," I assured her. As the officers led Michael out, he turned back one last time. His eyes found Sarah, and for a moment I saw what he truly was, not a successful banker or a controlling husband, but a pathetic bully whose power had evaporated the moment someone stood up to him. "You're nothing without me," he spat at Sarah. "You'll come crawling back. You'll see." "No," Sarah said, her voice steady for the first time in years. "I won't. I'm done being afraid of you. Michael, it's over." The door closed behind them, leaving a room full of stunned guests and overturned assumptions. Patricia sat heavily in her chair, staring at the spot where her son had been arrested. Rebecca poured herself a large glass of wine with shaking hands. I moved to Sarah, pulling her into my arms. She collapsed against me, sobbing, not from fear or pain, but from relief. 3 years of tension, terror, and careful control melting away in the safety of her mother's embrace. "The papers," I murmured into her hair. "Harrison prepared everything. Restraining order, divorce filing, emergency custody arrangements for any future proceedings. By Monday, you'll be legally protected from him in every possible way." "How?" she whispered. "How did you do all this?" 30 years of taking down criminals teaches you a few things," I said. "But mostly, I did it because I love you, because you deserve to be free, because that bastard needed to learn that some mothers don't just threaten, they deliver." Around us, Michael's family began to disperse, unable to maintain the fiction of a perfect holiday gathering. Patricia left without a word, her world of denial shattered. Rebecca muttered something about checking on the children she'd left with a babysitter. One by one, they fled the scene of their complicity. Soon, it was just Sarah and me in the dining room, surrounded by the remnants of a Thanksgiving that had become a liberation. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now?" I smiled, pulling out my phone to text the security team that would be watching the house. "Now you start remembering who you are, and Michael starts learning what it's like to be powerless." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 o'clock, 15 minutes, just as I'd promised, 15 minutes from threat to justice. Timing, as they'd taught us at Quantico, was everything. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within an hour of Michael's arrest, I'd activated every piece of the plan. Sarah and I sat in the kitchen while the security team I'd hired did a sweep of the house, checking for weapons or anything Michael might use to harm her if he managed to make bail. A Mrs. Sullivan, the team leader, a former Marine named Torres, reported back, "We found a handgun in his home office, unregistered. Also found what appears to be surveillance equipment. Looks like he was monitoring Mrs. Hartley's communications." "Those document everything," I instructed. "That's evidence of stalking and illegal weapons possession." Sarah stared at the coffee mug in her hands. "He had a gun? I didn't know." "Men like Michael always have secrets, sweetheart. The gun was probably for intimidation, another tool of control. I pulled out my phone as it buzzed. That's Harrison. The emergency protective order is signed. Michael can't come within 500 feet of you, this house, or any place you might be. Another text came through. This one from William Ashford, Michael's senior partner. Preliminary audit confirms your findings. Board meeting called for Monday morning. This is catastrophic, Margaret. I showed Sarah the message. By Monday afternoon, Michael won't have a job. Without his income and reputation, his entire identity crumbles. Won't that make him more dangerous? Sarah asked, fear creeping back into her voice. Which is why we're not stopping there. I pulled up another message. Remember my friend at the FBI, Special Agent Chen? She's opening a federal investigation into the embezzlement. Michael's looking at 5 to 10 years minimum, and that's if he pleads guilty. The doorbell rang, making Sarah jump. Torres checked the security monitor. It's a woman, mid-60s, looks upset. Patricia. I'd wondered how long it would take. Let her in, I said, but stay close. Patricia entered the kitchen like a woman sleepwalking. Her perfect composure had shattered, leaving someone old and lost. How could you? She whispered, sinking into a chair. How could you destroy my son like this? I didn't destroy him, I replied evenly. I simply exposed what he was. You've known for years. Patricia, you've seen the signs, heard the excuses, watched my daughter fade away. You chose to enable him. He's not a monster, she protested weakly. He has a temper. His father was the same way. Men in our family are passionate. Passionate? Sarah's voice cut through her former mother-in-law's denial. Is that what you call it when he choked me until I passed out? When he broke my phone because I texted a female colleague? When he made me quit my job because male parents might look at me? Patricia flinched at each accusation but rallied. You must have done something to provoke. Stop! My voice was steel. The moment you finish that sentence is the moment I release the recording of you telling Sarah to be a better wife while she had a black eye. Yes, Patricia, I have that too. 3 years of you enabling your son's abuse, documented and ready for civil court. She went white. You're vindictive, evil. I'm a mother protecting her child, I corrected, something you never learned to do. Patricia turned to Sarah, desperation clear in her eyes. Sarah, please, don't let her do this. Michael loves you. He'll get help. Counseling, anger management. You can work through this. No. Sarah's voice was stronger now. I'm done working through his abuse. I'm done making excuses. I'm done being afraid in my own home. But what will people say? Patricia wailed. The scandal, his career, our family's reputation. Your family's reputation was built on lies, I said. Time for some truth. My phone rang. Rodriguez. Margaret, thought you should know. Michael's lawyer is pushing for immediate bail. Judge is considering it. Tell the judge about the unregistered firearm Torres just found, and the surveillance equipment. That should change his mind about bail. Copy that. How's Sarah? I looked at my daughter, who was facing down her mother-in-law with newfound steel in her spine, getting stronger by the minute. After I hung up, Patricia made one last attempt. I'll pay you. Whatever you want, just drop the charges. Don't ruin his life over one mistake. One mistake? Sarah laughed, the sound bitter. He's hit me at least 50 times in 3 years, choked me, thrown me into walls, broken my bones. Which one was the mistake, Patricia? The older woman's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The weight of her complicity, her willful blindness, seemed to crash down on her all at once. Get out, Sarah said quietly. Get out of my house. And if you ever contact me again, I'll file charges against you too for harassment and witness intimidation. Patricia fled, leaving behind only the lingering scent of expensive perfume and shattered delusions. You did well, I told Sarah, standing up to her like that. I learned from the best, she replied, managing a small smile. Mom, what you did tonight, the planning, the evidence, the coordination, it's incredible. It's what I do, I said simply, what I've always done. Take down predators who think they're untouchable. Torres appeared in the doorway. "Ma'am, we've completed the security assessment. I've stationed 2 men outside for tonight. My recommendation is that Mrs. Hartley relocate to the safe house until the situation stabilizes." Sarah nodded. "I want to leave. I can't stay here tonight. Too many memories." "Already arranged," I assured her. "Doctor, Summers will meet us there. She's cleared her schedule for the next week to help you process everything." As Sarah went upstairs to pack essentials, my phone buzzed again. A text from Blackwood, the forensic accountant. "Just received call from federal prosecutor. They're fast-tracking the case based on evidence provided. Warrant will be issued Monday for additional charges." Then Rodriguez. "Bail denied based on weapons charge and flight risk. He's spending the holiday weekend in county. His lawyer is apoplectic." One by one, the dominoes fell. Michael's support system, built on fear and facade, crumbled without its foundation. His job, his freedom, his carefully crafted image, all destroyed in a single evening. Sarah returned with a small suitcase, her movements already different, freer. She paused at the dining room doorway, looking at the table still set with the ruins of Thanksgiving dinner. "All those years," she murmured, "all those family dinners where they watched him belittle me, control me, hurt me, and they said nothing." "They're complicit," I agreed. "Every one of them who saw the signs and chose comfort over conscience, but they can't claim ignorance anymore." We left through the garage, Torres's team providing escort to the safe house. As we drove away, Sarah reached over and took my hand. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry I didn't listen when you tried to warn me. Sorry I let it go on so long. Sorry you had to—" "No apologies," I interrupted. "You survived. That's what matters. And now he's the one who's sorry." "Do you think he is sorry?" I thought of Michael in a jail cell, stripped of his Armani suit and Swiss watch, reduced to a number and a set of charges. No, men like him are only sorry they got caught, but that's enough. He'll have years in federal prison to think about the consequences of his choices. The safe house was a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a secure building 40 minutes away. Doctor. Summers was already there, warm and professional, ready to begin the hard work of healing. As I prepared to leave Sarah in capable hands, she hugged me tight. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me, for fighting when I couldn't, for being the mother I needed." "Always," I promised. "That's what mothers do." Driving home alone, I thought about Patricia's accusation of vindictiveness. Perhaps she was right, but sometimes vindication and vindictiveness were 2 sides of the same coin. Sometimes destroying a monster was the only way to save what they were destroying. My phone lit up with a final message from Rodriguez. "Just watched him in interrogation. He's demanding to speak to Sarah. Claims this is all a misunderstanding. Still doesn't get it. Still thinks he has power." I smiled grimly. Michael Hartley was about to learn what true powerlessness felt like. Federal prison, financial ruin, social ostracism. The complete dismantling of everything he'd built on the foundation of my daughter's fear. Was it revenge? Perhaps. But it was also justice. And after 3 years of watching my daughter disappear piece by piece, justice tasted very sweet indeed. The silence that followed Michael's removal was profound. Sarah and I stood in the wreckage of what had been a Thanksgiving dinner, the carving knife still glinting on the platter, mashed potatoes growing cold, cranberry sauce congealing in its crystal bowl, the tableau of a family gathering shattered by truth. 22 witnesses, I said, surveying the abandoned chairs. Not one of them will be able to claim they didn't see what he really was. Sarah picked up her wine glass, still full, because Michael monitored her alcohol intake like everything else. She raised it slightly. To freedom. To justice, I countered, finding my own glass. The crystals sang as they touched, a pure note in the heavy air. We spent the next hour in the kitchen. Not cleaning, the security team would handle that, but talking. Really talking, for the first time in years. Sarah told me things she'd hidden, the full extent of Michael's control, the GPS tracker he'd put in her car, the cameras he'd claimed were for security but were really for surveillance, the separate bank account where he'd been hiding assets, preparing to leave her destitute if she ever tried to escape. I documented that too, I assured her. Blackwood found it weeks ago. It's already frozen, pending the divorce settlement. How did I let it get so bad? Sarah wondered aloud. I'm an educated woman. I taught children about healthy relationships. How did I become this? It happened slowly, I said. So slowly you don't notice until you're drowning. He isolated you systematically, broke down your confidence piece by piece. It's not your fault, sweetheart. It's never the victim's fault. My phone buzzed. A message from the security team. Perimeter secure. Subject's family members have all departed. No attempts at return. Another from Rodriguez. He's been processed, charged with assault, battery, possession of an unregistered firearm, and intimidation of a witness. Prosecutor says with your evidence. He's looking at minimum 5 years state, plus whatever the feds add. I showed Sarah the messages. Color returned to her cheeks. Not the hectic flush of fear or shame, but healthy color. The beginning of renewal. What happens now, she asked. Now you heal. You rebuild. You remember who Sarah Sullivan was before she became Sarah Hartley? I reached across the table, taking her hands. They were steady now, no longer trembling. The divorce will be brutal. He'll fight with everything he has left, but Rebecca Morrison is the best family law attorney in the state, and with our evidence, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. And his family? Will either distance themselves to save their own reputations or double down on denial. Either way, they're no longer your problem. Sarah nodded slowly. I want to teach again. When this is over, when I'm stronger, I want to go back to the classroom. I've already spoken to Principal Matthews at Riverside Elementary. Your position was filled, but she'd create a new one for you in a heartbeat. The children loved you. Sarah, the parents trusted you. That doesn't go away because you married a monster. Tears flowed then, but they were different from the tears I'd seen for 3 years. These were tears of relief, of possibility, of hope. I held my daughter as she cried, feeling the strength returning to her spine, the steel reforming in her soul. When the tears stopped, we called Dr. Summers. She arrived within 30 minutes, professional but warm, ready to begin the hard work of undoing 3 years of psychological damage. The first few weeks will be the hardest, she warned. Trauma bonds are powerful. There may be moments when Sarah wants to go back, when she second-guesses everything. That's normal. That's why we have safeguards in place. I thought of the restraining order, the criminal charges, the federal investigation, the frozen assets, the security team, layer upon layer of protection. Michael Hartley would never touch my daughter again. As midnight approached, we prepared to leave. Sarah packed a small bag. She'd return for her belongings later, with police escort. The house felt different already, as if Michael's absence had lifted a curse from the rooms. Wait, Sarah said suddenly. She walked to the dining room one last time, to the head of the table where Michael had held court. She picked up his wine glass, expensive crystal, of course, nothing but the best for his image, and dropped it. It shattered on the hardwood floor, 1,000 pieces catching the light. Now we can go, she said. The safe house was ready, stocked with everything Sarah would need for the coming weeks. Doctor. Summers would visit daily. The security team would monitor around the clock. Rodriguez would keep us updated on the criminal proceedings. Morrison would handle the divorce filing first thing Monday morning. As I hugged Sarah goodbye at the safe house door, she whispered, I know what you risked for me. Your reputation, possible legal challenges, everything. Why? I thought of David, her father, the detective who died protecting others. I thought of the badge in my purse, the oath I'd taken to serve and protect, but mostly, I thought of the moment I'd first held her, tiny and perfect and utterly dependent on my protection. Because 40 years ago, I promised to keep you safe. Michael made the mistake of thinking that promise had an expiration date. Sarah smiled, a real smile, the first I'd seen in years. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart, always. Driving home in the early morning darkness, I thought about power. Michael had thought power meant control, domination, fear. But real power was patience, planning, the ability to wait for the perfect moment and then strike without mercy. By 11:59 p.m., Thanksgiving was over. Michael Hartley sat in a cell, stripped of everything he'd valued. His family faced the uncomfortable mirror of their complicity. His victim had found her voice again. And I drove home with the satisfaction of a job well done. 30 years of taking down criminals had taught me many things, but the most important lesson was this. Sometimes the most dangerous predator in the room isn't the one making threats. Sometimes it's the gray-haired woman quietly documenting every word, every blow, every crime, waiting for the perfect moment to prove that a mother's love isn't just protective, it's tactical, strategic, and when necessary, absolutely ruthless. Michael Hartley had slapped my daughter at Thanksgiving dinner. What I did next ended his control forever. And I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your experiences and perspectives make our community stronger. Until next time, remember, sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places.